Who responsible? Who responsible for give a Jesus in the sky and a heaven in the sky where we can enjoy no but when we die? Who responsible? Who responsible for the Westminster system that has been perpetuated in the Caribbean islands, the English Caribbean islands, where the former slaves is supposed to connect with this kind of system? When we had that system of our own that was going quite well until these guys come and destroy the system and now force us to go into a system that is not conducive to our culture, conducive to our even mind, spirit, body, and soul. So we force ourselves in that system. We force ourselves in it. And look at us. Look at us. One can or might say that maybe at least our foreparents who had the chain round them foot could have think and cut it off of them foot and run away. Now we have the chain round our head, round our brains. We can't think. So we put on some Clark's booty and go have fun and dance. We want to say evening to our guests, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, my brother.
We are talking with a mic there, yes.
Good evening, Muta.
Oh, you doing, man?
I'm doing very well, my brother.
You're not tired yet? Tell me, because
you don't care if I'm tired or not, brother, no, but I'm glad to be here. Yes, I am. I feel good.
Yes, man. It's nice to have you. And yesterday was wonderful. A lot of people walk out of that place feeling really good about themselves, you know, seeing the slides that you present and, you know, just the interaction that you gave. A lot of people actually felt good about it, you know. So we give thanks to that also. We give thanks to your presence at the Marcus Garvey celebration on Sunday. And today is the day, really. Today is the day.
Well, I can honestly say that I haven't been many places where there was such a hunger and a thirst that people had for knowledge of self. So it's been a very, very encouraging trip, a very uplifting trip. When I get back to the U.S., when I get on Facebook, when I get on the internet, I can honestly say that the sisters and brothers in Jamaica have embraced me. They embrace Garvey. They embrace their history. And it's very encouraging because we see so many negative things about African people. So it's important to be able to celebrate the victories that we see. And it's wonderful to see people embracing knowledge of self.
All right, yeah, all right. So we want to get into the nitty here. Yeah, we want to get into the nitty here because how much books you have on the market? How much books?
On the market, I think I only have about 3. I've written or edited 14 or 15 books.
Yes.
3 or 4 new ones should be out within the next 6 months or so. But my big book is African Presence in Early Asia with Ivan Van Sertima.
Yes.
But I have a new book that should come out next month. An African publishing house called Books of Africa in London is going to publish a book of mine called Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe. And I'm very pleased about that. It'll complement my work on Asia because Africans are all over the world.
All right. You know, yesterday when you presented the thing, you were just showing like images of African faces from places that you travel. Where I really want to get into tonight is the possible contribution that African people make to these cultures that you find them in. You know, for instance, India, China, especially upon that level. But we talk about the migration thing, you know, coming out of Africa into Asia. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting because when you're going to school, we don't hear nothing about Africans in these places.
Not only do you not hear about them in school, you don't see them on television. So the people that I showed last night, I call them the invisible people. You see these places like Palestine, Iraq, India, Pakistan, China, but you never see black people in those parts of the world. I've come to the conclusion that there may be more black people, more Africans in Asia than Africa itself. So I call them the invisible people. They've been there since the beginning. And the important thing to emphasize again and again and again, and I think that Garvey would say this, is that we have a history that begins before slavery.
Definitely.
And that if we start with slavery, we're crippled, we're handicapped from the beginning. So it's been my great pleasure to follow in the footsteps of those ancient Africans who left Africa 100,000 years ago and became the Aboriginal people, not just of Australia, but the Aboriginal people of the world. Humanity is indebted to Africa, and the children of Africa spread to the far corners of the earth long before Christopher Columbus was a twinkle in anybody's eye.
Ivan Van Sertuma tell us that the king of Mali took that journey from across the Atlantic Ocean long before Columbus. In the week came before Columbus' book.
Well, we're talking about different phases of history now. One, Africa is the birthplace of humanity itself, that the first modern human beings, even the archaic human beings, come from Africa, and they spread. And then you have Africans who came even later than that and brought the seeds of civilization with them. You know, just like we find ancient Egypt was an African civilization, you could find those same Africans in ancient Mexico, in India, in China, in Southeast Asia, in Greece, in Rome. And then you have the massive enslavement of African people. And I'm arguing that the problem is that's where we start. We start with enslavement, invasion, colonization, and so we become a crippled people. And we're unable to break out of that room. Ivan Van Sertuma showed us that that was not the case. Other scholars did it before them, and I'm just following in their footsteps. And many others. You have this brother named Chancellor Williams, who wrote the book Destruction of Black Civilization, who addressed a profound question that if black people did great things in the past, what happened to us? How do we lose it to the extent that most of us think we never had it? But Chancellor Williams also talked about black people in India. He said that there were so many black people in China at one time that they were able to form their own kingdom. Black people in Palestine, black people in Iraq, and black people in ancient America, which is particularly important because most of us in the Americas, and I've traveled all over the Americas, we are convinced that our history began with slavery. When I go down and talk to black people in places like Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Peru, in Colombia, that's all they know. And so when I give these presentations and I show them images of Black Christ, if I show them images of Imhotep, I have seen big, strong, grown black men break down and cry like babies because they say they were never proud to be black until that particular time. So history has the ability to transform. You know, a remarkable example of how history can impact the people is Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm, in his own writings, was a gangster, a criminal, a pimp, a burglar, a drug dealer, all of those things. And he was incarcerated like so many black men. A lot of people may not know that there are more African men in prison in the United States or in the universities. And while he was in prison, he came under the influence of people like Jay Rogers, right here from Jamaica, and Carter G. Woodson. And Malcolm was transformed to the extent that he is later to say that of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. So history is a very, very powerful thing. And once the people know who they are, it's something you can never take away from them. And I think the Western world is frightened of an educated African people who know their history, because once you know who you are, nothing can stop you.
All right. Make take the journey then, and journey from Africa across to Saudi Arabia into parts of Afghanistan, go into India, because it's a very intriguing thing to hear, because Indians came here as indentured laborers a long time ago, and we see the Indian population has grown to the point where they have a monopoly for certain things, especially on the North Coast. The inbound shops is mostly run by Indians.
I was able to see that tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to an Indian restaurant, my brother.
Yeah, well, a lot of Indian restaurants. But, all right. Explain to Jamaica, what, apart from just images in India, what was the contribution, or what is the contribution of African people to Indian culture, whether it's religion, whether it's economics, whether it's social, bringing just cultural expression? What, in your findings, you would say is a very a compelling thing about the influence of Africa, partly India?
Well, first, let me say that the presentation that I gave on Sunday was a very good one. But what The difference is obviously between Sunday at IRI FM and last night at UWI Mona is that I was able to show the photographs because I think that they're very powerful. But India, again, has more black people than any single country on earth. India is a very diverse population, and that in the northwest you have people that look like Caucasians, that look like Europeans for all intents and purposes, and then if you go to northeast India, you have people that look like Chinese. But the first people of India were black people, and the people who built the first civilization of South Asia, and that includes India, were black people called Dravidians. And these are black people like the Nubians in the Nile Valley who had naturally straight to wavy hair. And among the things they introduced are urbanization. They had big cities with hot and cold water, with flushing toilets, with trash chutes. They had a game similar to chess. They invented the windmill. They domesticated the chicken. They domesticated rice. I'd like to say they domesticated rice and peas, but that might be an exaggeration. Yeah. And then later on, you have the people called the Aryans, who are early white people, horsemen, very nomadic, very violent, very barbaric, who invade South Asia, who invade India, and disperse those black people to other parts of India and other parts of Asia itself. So among the contributions that Africans have made to India in the most ancient times is the religion. And you find that in Hinduism. Hinduism is a fusion between the philosophical and spiritual and religious beliefs of those early Aryans and those Indo-Europeans and those black people who had lived there from time immemorial. So the most important contribution probably in terms of the black presence in India is in the religion itself, not just Hinduism, but particularly Buddhism. So in this huge country, which is about to surpass China in regards to being the most populous country in the world, black people have a profound influence in the religious and philosophical systems that exist there. Yeah. And then later on, of course, Africans are to play, as you indicated, a profound role in the development of Islam. And there are more Muslims in India than most countries in the world. A lot of people are not aware that the largest concentration of Muslims are not Arabs. You have first Indonesia, and then probably Pakistan and Iran and India itself. So Africans in India play a fundamental role in the philosophical and religious movement of India, and of course, that's essential in any environment in any country.
All right. Make a step back a little. You mentioned the Dravidians, which I read about the Dravidians, who kind of get some knowledge about the Dravidians, but explain to the people these Dravidians that you speak about. Where did actually the Dravidians come from? And how did the Dravidians come to be known as Dravidians?
Well, that's a good question. And I'm not even sure of the origins of the term Dravidians. But first of all, when we look at black people in Asia, when we look at black people in India, when we look at the Dravidians, it causes us to re-examine what do black people look like anyway? Because black people are a very diverse people. And here you are talking about people with very dark skin, broad nose, full lips, but naturally straight to wavy hair. And I suppose it's because of that those people in India are typically not referred to as black people, but as Caucasians or Indians or some obscure racial category. But the Dravidians are black people with naturally straight to wavy hair who in ancient times were referred to by the Greeks and Romans as Eastern Ethiopians. And the word Ethiopia, of course, is a Greek word which means land of the burnt-faced people. And the Greeks and the Romans distinguished two different kinds of black people. Those in Africa itself with black skin, broad nose, full lips, but with woolly hair, or what I call happy to be nappy hair. And those in Asia, including the Dravidians, same features except naturally straight to wavy hair. So the Dravidians are an ethnic, linguistic group in India that number about 200 to 300 million people.
When did the migration of these to India, like what period of time you talk about? You know, what?
Maybe as far back as 90,000 years. And we know this based on what are called genetic or DNA studies that show that there's only one race, and that's the human race, which started in Africa as black-skinned people, and they begin to spread from Africa maybe 150,000 years ago. Now, those who went into India probably came there 90 to 100,000 years. And there are different groups of them.
The Dravidians? No, we're talking specifically about the Dravidians. I'm thinking that the Dravidians is the more profound influence in terms of, as you said, the religious perspective of India?
Well, you know, you have a group called the Adi Dravidians, or the Adivasis, and that just means the first people. So you have different groups of Dravidians, and again, these are the people today that are oftentimes called tribal people, or what the British call scheduled caste. When the British went to India, they noted all of these various people, and they wrote about them. That's one thing the British have done. They wrote about the people in their empire. So you have very, very, quote-unquote, primitive people who came there from the very beginning and who were the aboriginal people of India. And then you have similar groups, related groups, who come maybe 10,000 years ago, maybe as recent as 5,000 years ago, and those are the ones who established what is called the Indus Valley Civilization, or the Harappan civilization, Harappa being one of the first great cities in India. And so we're talking 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, and these sisters and brothers are described in the early Hindu religious texts called the Rig Veda. They're described as having flat noses, black skin, but straight hair. And so I think that African people, that's us, we have to broaden our concept or definition of what black people look like, because there's a broad range of black people. And bottom line is, everybody can trace their lineage to Africa. And so I think we also have to define what we mean when we say African. I think these definitions are very, very important, and we have to have the ability to define ourselves, because otherwise people will put labels on us and have us responding to those labels. So, and the Dravidians are no exception.
All right. So when you went to India, you met with the Dravidians?
Yes.
All right. How they see themselves? Who they see themselves as?
Well, again, there's different groups of Dravidians. For example, the Dravidians today, there are pockets of them throughout India, but most of them live in the south. And the ones that I've spent probably the most time with are the people called the Tamils. And the Tamils, who live in Tamil Nadu in southeast India, see themselves as black people, but they don't call themselves Africans. They would say that they are black, but that Africans and Tamils have a common origin, that they come from the same place. Aboriginal Australians are the same way. They say that there's a continent now underneath the sea, and it connected Australia, South Asia, including Tamil Nadu, India, and East Africa, and that these different groups of black people walked back and forth in ancient times. And ultimately, that continent, which some people call Gondwana land, and other people call Lemuria, sank under the sea. So the Tamils, the Dravidians, see themselves as black people, but they don't necessarily see themselves as Africans. Right. They just think we all come from the same place.
Okay. All right. So we have the Dravidians, I just say, part of that Ethiopian origin, according to what you said. I mean, we heard that in different other historical references. And so the Africans are moving eastward. So they are moving from India and they are going into now China.
You have Africa as the birthplace. Africa is the mother continent. And the first place those Africans moved to is across the Red Sea into what is now called Southern Arabia. And you see the same physical type of people that we find in South India and Australia and Sri Lanka. You can also find them in Southern Arabia. And they filter into Asia, and they move from place to place and eventually populate the entire country or the entire continent. I give you something that maybe, might illustrate what I'm talking about. In 1996, not to get too far afield, because I want to talk about this in depth, I was invited to Australia. I met some Aboriginal Australians, particularly one sister named Graceland Smallwood, very, very powerful black woman in Australia. I call her the Queen of Aboriginal Australia. And she invited me to come to Australia to lecture. But at the same time, I had signed a contract to go to Egypt and lecture there. and the people in Egypt would not let me out of that contract. So the Aboriginal Australians said, look, Brother Runoko, we admire your work to the extent that we trust you to name anybody you want, and that person can come to Australia and be the keynote speaker at this historic conference. So I picked a good friend of mine, a good research associate of mine to go. He went to Australia, I went to Egypt. When I got back, I called him and I said, how did it go? He said it was a disaster. Well, what was the problem? He said these sisters and brothers don't see themselves as African. Talking about Aboriginal Australians now. And he said they don't have a problem with Africa. They're not anti-African, but they see themselves as indigenous, as Aboriginal. That bothered me because I want all black people to say I'm African and I'm proud. So I called my guru. I called a man named Dr. John Henry Clark. And I said, Dr. Clark, I have a problem. He says, what's wrong, man? I told him, a friend of mine went to Australia, met Aboriginal Australians. They say they're not African. He said, don't worry about it. He said, I can take you down 125th Street in Harlem and show you the blackest person in New York City who will say I'm not an African. He said, wait until Africa gets strong, and then even you will be surprised who embraces their African heritage. And I think that's the crux of the matter, because we are taught that Africa is the worst place this side of hell. I have heard people with doctorate degrees, African Americans, say things as ignorant as, thank God for slavery because at least it got us out of Africa. Now, black people in India have been away from Africa, in some cases 90,000 years. So if African Americans have a negative attitude towards Africa, then you can imagine, and we've only been away for 300-400 years, you can imagine how black people in India must feel. So there's a distance, there's a disconnect, but we can resolve that when we begin to make Africa a powerful place, and we begin to show that Africa is not the jungle after all, but it's the birthplace of humanity and civilization. And to me, that is the key, the development and evolution of African consciousness among black populations all over the world.
But all right, within the development that you speak about, it's almost like the development separate the people more. You know, because when you look on like they have a group now. Like you have the AU, you have the EU, and you have now Brazil, Russia, China, and India. They form a group. I don't know if you heard about it. An economic group, a power base with Brazil, Russia, China, and India, and they now include South Africa in it.
Yeah, these so-called developing countries.
Yeah, all right. But when we look at even India as a force in itself, you don't feel that India development means that is appear to be moving away more from the idea of the Africanization of this place.
I would say that India is one of the most racist countries in the world. India is one of the most anti-black countries on earth. They really emphasize this notion of fair skin, you know, and they are taught to be anti-African. But at the same time, Africans themselves are taught to be anti-African. I've been to half the countries in Africa. I've been to Africa maybe 50 times, and there's no doubt in my mind that you have the idea that to embrace Europe is to embrace modernity, and to embrace Africa is to embrace backwardness. And I'm sorry to say, my brother, I have seen some of that in Jamaica. This has been a wonderful experience for me. But when I hear about bleaching, and this whole notion that I'm not African, I'm not black, I'm brown, it's very distressful to me. But that's the same phenomenon that's taking place in Africa itself, and also India and these other countries. And again, it has a lot to do with Africa being the poor man, Africa being underdeveloped, Africa having all these resources, but Africa being raped and pillaged and robbed for hundreds of years. And so there's an anti-African bias, and that is not an accident, that's deliberate. The same thing exists in India towards Africa, towards black. And again, India is not monolithic. India is very diverse in terms of its population.
But if India is developing at the pace obviously India developed without Africa developing, you know, seeing that there will be less of an acceptance of Africa and more of a nationalistic perspective from Indians in India. Well, instead of them embracing them Africanness, they more get nationalistic as Indians rather than getting
embracing their African identity.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the people who run India today are more of the Aryan, Caucasian type. In parts of Africa today, like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Indians, or people of Indian origin, tend to treat African people like slaves. They definitely treat them as second-class citizens. But then again, you could find the same thing among many African Americans who view Africa with great contempt. And again, I've heard people say, thank God for slavery because at least it got us out of Africa. So if we find that among African Americans, Africans in America who've only been away for a few hundred years, again, we have to say that it's not unusual, or we don't find it surprising to find that same attitude accelerated many times in India for people who've been away from 10,000 or 90,000 years.
No, the reasoning is not, I wasn't talking about, the comparison with the idea that not being African. The idea of what you talk about, as soon as Africa show itself as a power, then people outside, which include the Indian who claim that them is not African, will now embrace Africa. What may I ask, what may I say is that maybe India, as a developing nation in its own, will not give rise to the idea that them is African because they are developing outside of the African sphere.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
India has its own self-interest, and even beyond that, China. And what I fear is that what we are doing is replacing one colonial master with another.
Yeah.
That these countries have their own self-interest, and that's what they're going to pursue. Everybody has their own self-interest, it seems to me, what they're going to pursue. Everybody has their own self-interest, it seems to me, except you and me.
Yeah.
Africans seem to love a world that doesn't love us back, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're in the situation that we're in. That African people tend to be forgiving, we tend to be open, we want to love everybody. We want to be loved in return, but that love is rarely given. And I think that it brings another question to mind, and that is, how do we achieve power again in the world without taking on the attributes of those who oppress us? I don't want to be a black-white man, but at the same time, I don't want anybody's foot on my neck. So it's a tricky road that we travel.
This is the Cutting Edge, and I refer there with you with Dr. RUNOKO Rashidi, and is a man who, as you can hear, has traveled extensively, trying to bring to light the different aspects of African culture and African attitude in different parts of the world, We're trying to get out of him the ideas of Africans who is Africans, but don't even know them is African, and Africans who is Africans who choose to identify with a nationality that is just there rather than a pan-African outlook. They are seeing themselves as...
Well, for the last 30 years, one of the things I've done, maybe the biggest thing, is travel around the world, but try to define what is an African. Because if we now say all humanity can trace their lineage to Africa, and I have no doubt about that based on DNA genetic studies, then who is an African and who is not? Are all black people Africans, we could ask ourselves? Are all Africans black people?
Well, I wouldn't
Can white people be Africans?
I wouldn't call Europeans Africans.
I would not either. But I'm saying that I think that what we need, maybe I'm wrong, is a clear definition of what we mean by African.
What would you say when you say African? What you mean?
Well, first of all, much of it has to do with the phenotype, the physical appearances. Brother Peter Tosh told us, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. But at the same time, it has to be more to it than that. You must have, in my opinion, some kind of spiritual, historical, cultural link to Africa. It has to be, or I would like to think, it's more than just what you look like, but it's something about your history, your language, your heritage. Now, there's no doubt that humanity is traced to Africa, and even Europeans have African ancestry. But that doesn't mean I would be willing to classify Europeans as Africans. In my opinion, those white people in South Africa, those Boers, are not they're no more African than Queen Elizabeth. these are the descendants of Africans, but they have no claim to Africa. So I think that it's up to us, the intellectuals, the artists, what have you, the historians, the anthropologists, to give a clear definition of what an African is. And I haven't come up with a crystal clear definition yet, but I know that Africans are black people, and I like to see it go beyond that point.
Well, John Henry Clark said it's stupid to say black Africans. You know, another thing when him say, why we keep saying black Africans? Africans black.
Yeah, but Africa has also been invaded.
Yeah, we know, but I mean, all right, in light of African and not the identification through color, right? People now saying, all right, you can identify Africans through color. But color is not the basis for being an African.
I think it's one of the bases.
Okay.
We know that, for example, you have the people in North Africa, the Arabs, you know, and they've been there for a very, very long time. But the old expression is just because you have cats, just because a cat has babies in an oven, you don't call the babies biscuits. Garvey raised the question. Somebody asked him, are you an African or a Jamaican? And he said, I will not give up a continent for an island. So place of birth alone does not determine your nationality.
Well, obviously, those white people who born in South Africa could have really give hold fast to them, say them is African.
Well,
ironically, them don't say them is African, really.
The white people in South Africa, from what I gather, have only claimed that they are African quite recently.
Yeah.
You know, because it's politically expedient for them in South Africa and Namibia and Zimbabwe and Botswana to now say, I'm an African too. I went to South Africa the first time in Namibia and did a bunch of lectures and TV and radio interviews, and they said, what are you here for? And I'm saying I'm here to build a bond of solidarity between Africans outside of Africa and Africans inside Africa itself. And invariably, a white person will call and say, my ancestors came here in 1652, and we've been here for 400 years. We have much more claim to being African than you do. And I say your history is European, your pedigree is European, your phenotype is European, and as far as I'm concerned, you are European and need to go back to Europe. And we could say the same thing about those Arabs in North Africa who are invaders and who treat Africans in general with great contempt. We could say the same thing about those Indians in East Africa, and the same thing about the Boers in South Africa. So Africa has to be cleansed. And when Marcus Garvey said Africa for the Africans, he wasn't talking about black people and a few nice white people too.
You know, I had to see him. I was in Cape Town on a radio show years ago, and we clashed with the same reasoning that these white people keep calling and saying that they're African, and I keep saying, but African is decided through heritage, culture, and genes.
That's right.
So it's not a matter of just being, you know, I use the term a cow born in a pig pen is a cow. And as you say about the caterpillar, but I'm going to put something to you. It's part of what I call MUTA philosophy, right? All right, listen to this. Black people keep saying they're descended from Africans. So when you hear a Jamaican now talk, him say, I'm a descendant of an African. Rather than saying he's an African, I'm saying descended from. I am putting it to you, that white people is a descendant from Africa.
Yes.
Black people. We are Africans. We don't descend from Africa.
I agree. Okay.
You know, I am feeling that the terminology, we have to watch the terms that we use to define ourselves. And descendants don't put you in the position of being the person, or being the thing, or being the group that you say you're descended from.
Well, if that's MUTA philosophy, I can agree with that.
I just ask you, you see it.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, because, you know, keep saying we're descended from African is not saying that we're African.
Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Africans, for the most part, aren't writing their own histories, aren't defining. There's an expression, and that is, and I agree with this, the essence of power is the ability to define someone's reality and have them live according to that definition as though it is a definition of their own choosing.
Yeah.
I also say that what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself, And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. So African people have to write their history, have to define themselves from their own perspective. As long as we allow other people to define ourselves, I should say, as long as we allow other people to define us from their perspective, then we'll be a race of cripples. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
All right. So, all right, we can move beyond India and going to China. You've been to China?
I have been to China.
Yeah, all right. The impact of African culture upon the Chinese culture.
Well, that's a little bit more difficult. Now, in terms of China, again, we know humanity began in Africa and spread to Asia tens of thousands of years ago. But in more modern times, we could say with accuracy that the first historical dynasty in China is called the Shang Dynasty, S-H-A-N-G. And the Shang come into being about 1700 BC, about 3,700 years ago. And the people who came after them, called the Zhou, described them as having black and oily skin. Chinese tradition says that the first emperor of China was a black dwarf. You have the evidence of physical anthropology, the skeletal remains that have been found in ancient southern China, clearly those of a black or Africoid people. You have the evidence of art. You have images of black people in the most remote phases of Chinese history. Now, when I went to China, I could not find any evidence of black people in China. I went into major museums. I talked to museum officials. I went in tombs. I could find nothing there. I had the photographs and books, but it's as though China has undergone a kind of an ethnic cleansing. So it's more difficult to reconstruct the black presence in China than it is in India, where you still have hundreds of millions of black people still there. So we know that Africans populated China. We know they had a big influence. But the question is, what happened to them? And then it opens another question. If we have an antagonistic relationship historically, Africans and Europeans, what has been our relationship historically with other groups of people? After all, Asians, I should say, Europeans and Africans are not the only two groups of people in the world. So historically, what has our relationship been with East Asians, so-called Mongoloid types? And it's my argument that they have been as antagonistic towards us, perhaps even more hostile towards us than even Europeans have. So the history of black people in China, like the history of black people in many other parts of the world, my brother, in my opinion, is really yet to be written.
Well, you know that the Arabs enslaved Africans longer than the Europeans.
They have enslaved Africans, but so did the Chinese.
No, I mean, in terms of what we know, I mean...
Yeah, but I'm saying...
How long the Chinese enslaved the Africans?
The Chinese went to Australia in ancient times and took Aboriginal Australians back to China as enslaved people. They also apparently raided places like New Guinea. So the enslaved Africans didn't just come from Africa, but they came from Australia and the South Pacific as well. And that's one of the reasons that, to me, these areas are so exciting, because the history of black people in Australia, in the Pacific, in Asia, for the most part, has not been written from an African perspective. And so I would like to think that Garvey would be proud of us, because we're expanding the vision of Africa and we're looking at black populations in the world from an African perspective in a way that's never been done before.
Yeah, this is the Culture Net, John Arif. Anyway, we're talking to RUNOKO. By the way, Dr. RUNOKO Rashidi is a doctor, right? As people don't say doctor, like what them say doctor. Ben Yokera, them say not a doctor.
I have a Doctor of Divinity degree.
Oh, you have a Doctor of Divinity degree. That's a good doctor. That's a good doctor.
You know, people were calling me Dr. Rashidi before I got the degree. So
oh, yeah?
For many people, it's just a sign, it's just a symbol of respect.
Respect, yes. All right. We was talking about the Chinese and the Indian thing. The influence of Buddhism across these countries, even going into Japan itself, is really a phenomenon. I mean, considering where it coming from, India, and it moving as far as through Afghanistan, what them call the Silky Road, go into the Japanese. You have any knowledge or any information that govern what we call now the movement of this spiritual connection of Buddhism from India into China into Japan itself?
Well, you could say that history is the movement of people, that people move all the time. And that is what history could be regarded as. And so you do have an African presence in ancient Afghanistan. They may have been Dravidians. You see images of black soldiers with naturally straight to wavy hair in the armies of Afghanistan 2,000 years ago. Now, Buddhism itself is older than that. Buddhism comes about as a reformation of Hinduism. Hinduism is a very racist religion. Let's face it. It's a very color-coded religion with the whites on top, the so-called mixed races in the middle, the masses of conquered black people on the bottom, and the so-called untouchables or outcasts, now known as Dalits or scheduled caste, on the very bottom. They're more or less the slaves of the upper echelons. Now, Buddhism comes as an attempt to reform that. Buddhism develops in India beginning about 500 or 600 BC, before the Christian era. And the earliest images of the Buddha are black skin, nappy hair, broad noses, full lips. There's no question about that. And it spreads, as you pointed out, to the rest of Asia, but it develops in India. Now, Sheikh Anta Diop, who wrote a series of books, this is the great African scholar from Senegal. Some people pronounce his name Diop, D-I-O-P. He argued that the Buddha was actually a series of, there wasn't one Buddha, according to Diop, a series of Egyptian priests, Kamite priests, African priests, who left Africa during the time of the Persian invasions towards the end of the dynasties of Egypt, and they spread to various parts of the world. Now, I've been saying that the black people of India tend to have naturally straight to wavy hair, but the images of the Buddha have nappy hair, have kinky hair, woolly hair, what I call good hair. And so you find these images, and then you find the spread of this image or imagery into China, into Japan, into Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, etc. So Buddhism is an attempt to reform Hinduism. It's a very egalitarian religion. It's a religion where women are relatively prominent. And you find the spread of it. Some people say the spread of Buddhism is the result of a man named Bodhidharma, who not only took Buddhism to the Far East, but also is credited with taking martial arts to the Far East. Now, in terms of Japan itself, you do have three things. You have two proverbs that have been used to suggest a black presence in Japan. One of them goes for a samurai. Everybody's heard of the samurai. For a samurai to be brave, he must have a bit of black blood. Another one says, to make a good samurai, half the blood in one's veins must be black. There's also the tradition that the first shogun, a military ruler of Japan, was a black man. In 1914, an Englishman, of all people, a fellow named Alexander Francis Chamberlain, in a book called the Journal of Race Development, April 1914, says, and even in far-off Japan, we can find traces of the ancient Negro. For when the armies of Japan were fighting their hereditary enemies known as the Ainu, they were led by a Negro general named Sakanoye Tamura, who became the first shogun, a military ruler of Japan. This is in the 8th century. So you have that bit of evidence. And then you have images of a deity in Japan named Fudomayo. Fudomayo, Fudomyoo, is one of the 5 wisdom kings in Japanese mythology. His name means the immovable. He's the patron of the samurai. He's always portrayed as a black man with an upturned sword and a natural hairstyle. So you have these bits and pieces of information. I'm sure that you could find similar things in Korea. Certainly the first people of the Philippines are called the Agta, A-G-T-A, which just means the people. The Spanish called them Negritos, or little Negroes, when they came to the Philippines in the 16th century. The Tagalog, the majority population in the Philippines, calls them Eta, A-E-T-A, a pejorative word that means filthy. These are the original people of the Philippines. They're the original people of Asia. Small black people that in Africa we would call pygmies. In Southeast Asia, same thing. In Cambodia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, you have not just the remnants of black populations, but you have great cities, kingdoms developed by black people. In Cambodia, it's called Angkor. In Vietnam, it's the civilization called the Cham civilization. And you find something similar in Thailand, in early Thailand, with these really Africoid images of the Buddha. So wherever you go throughout Asia, and the earlier in Asia, the better, you find remnants of the African presence. And these are things that should be taught in school. They should be taught to black people. They should be taught to white people. They should be taught to yellow people. Because when you know these things, it gives us an even playing field. It doesn't give one group a sense of superiority and another group of inferiority. We are trying to set the record straight. African proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And in order to know where you're going, you must know where you've been. So never let anybody tell you that history is not important. Never let anybody tell you that happened a long time ago. It's irrelevant. What happened 10,000 years ago, Brother Muta, and you know this as well as I, is as relevant as what happened 5 minutes ago. And we want to not just know the history of Jamaica. We don't want to just know the history of the United States. We want to know the history of the world, of which black people have been among the primary movers since the beginning of time.
Yeah, all right. You know, a lot of people, I want to go back to the Buddha thing, because maybe a lot of people miss out on the imagery that is portrayed. There's two things happening with the Buddha image. One is that a lot of people don't realize that the ear is a nappy ear. In India, because when it move across the Silky part and reach into China, the image change. You become now a big fat man. I mean, if you look at the Chinese Buddha, is different from the Indian Buddha, the image. Now, there's two things happening there, because if you reflect back on Marcus Garvey, the philosophy and opinion, Marcus Garvey say the image of God, where people, if the Jews see God through the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, let him do it. If the Chinese want to see God through a Chinese spectacle, let him do it. But we, don't let it might be, should see God through the spectacle of Ethiopia.
That's right.
Now, where I see happen is that the Chinese take Buddha and they make him become a Chinese.
Well, the image matter. The image. Well, I would say the image is modified. And again, it's important to look at the earliest images.
No. What I'm saying is that here's a group of people who's taking an Indian, a black man, nappy ear from India, and then now converting him into the Chinese images, into a fat, the Buddha that the Chinese project is a fat man. The Buddha that the Indians project is a slim, nappy ear man. So the images it's transformed because of the people who is seeing this understanding. Now they are using it in the interest and the benefit of their spectacle.
Well, that's true, but it's also true that there are different forms of the Buddha. You have different representations of the Buddha, because there are variations of Buddhism itself. So you do have the fat, happy, smiling Buddha, but you also have Buddha the ascetic, and then you have what are called bodhisattvas. And bodhisattvas are people who have achieved a kind of a state of enlightenment, but have chosen to remain in the world and help other people achieve enlightenment. So the Buddha takes different forms depending on the culture. And for example, if you go to Afghanistan, in the later histories of Afghanistan, you can see some images of the Buddha that clearly look European, with European hair. Now, it is said, by some scholars that the hair, that nappy hair, that woolly hair, that good hair on the Buddha's head is not hair at all. But those are little snails that crawled up on top of his head to protect him from the sun. Yeah, I went to India, my brother, 3 times, and I sat under the Bodhi tree, a remnant of the Bodhi tree, and I meditated, and not one snail crawled up on top of my head. So a lot of it's just nonsense. And again, we suffer from the fact that we've allowed other people to write history for us. You know that old expression, until the lion has his historian, the hunter will always be a hero. Yes. So I don't spend a lot of time anymore talking about the mean, terrible things white people have done to us. I haven't forgotten. I have a great memory, and they haven't asked for forgiveness. But to me, that's a luxury. And I think that what we have to do is be about the writing of our own history. And if we don't do that, we have to hold ourselves responsible for it.
All right. The Japanese culture, what make it distinct from the Chinese culture? Because Jamaicans, I don't think Jamaicans can tell the difference between a Japanese and a Chinese. You know, when you say a Japanese, everybody says a Chinaman. It's like, I don't think everyone knows the difference between that.
And the same thing for the Koreans.
Yeah. So what distinguish the Japanese, a specific thing that distinguishes Japanese culture from Chinese culture?
I think the Japanese think of themselves as a more refined, more sophisticated, more urbane, more cultured group of people than the Chinese. But to me, and for you, and probably most of us, those differences are very minor. Yeah. You know, they're nuanced. Essentially, culturally, they're very, very, very similar people. Yeah. But in all of these places, what we're saying is that there's an African presence, either ancient or modern. You could go to Mongolia, and I had pictures. I didn't show them last night. I have about 50,000 photographs. Last night I showed about 200. But I could have easily shown you pictures of black people in, say, for example, Mongolia. I have an image of a black man, clearly black man. Perhaps I did show it. I don't recall. A black man in Mongolia training a horse several hundred years ago. Yeah, you have images of black people from the most remote phases of Chinese history. You have black people in the Shang dynasty, in the Tang dynasty. You have black people in the Yuan dynasty around 1400. This is during the time of the Mongols. So you have different groups of black people in different parts of Asia at different times. Some of them are kings and queens. Some of them are gods and goddesses. Some of them are servants and slaves. But all of it is a part of history that needs to be written, needs to be reconstructed, needs to be presented to the world. And I think that what we will find is that all people have contributed to civilization. All people have contributed to culture, and nobody has contributed more than the African.
Yeah. And, you feel that, all right. So RUNOKO, you go all these places and you find the African presence here, the African presence there, the African presence almost everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yes. So now that we have this knowledge, what is the significance of having the knowledge in terms of the development? What would you say we can use this knowledge to do in this 21st century of capitalism and globalization?
Well, what I'm hoping is that in the course of tonight we'll continue and we'll look at black people in various other parts of the world. But to answer your question, I think a knowledge of self gives you a degree of confidence that you cannot take away. I think, what does Garvey say? If you have no confidence, you are twice defeated in the race of life.
But with confidence, you have won even before you have.
Exactly. So I think that a knowledge of self gives you a sense of self-esteem. It gives you a confidence, and you cannot put enough emphasis on that. I think if we knew who we were, it would fundamentally change our behavior. We wouldn't we would treat black women in a different light. We treat women in a different way. But I'm especially concerned about the way black women have been denigrated in the media and made to look as sexual objects, as whores and sluts and the whole 9 yards. You know what I'm saying? I think if we understood that we do have royalty in our veins, that African women historically have been queens, then I think that we wouldn't use the B word. we wouldn't disrespect them in the manner that we do. I think that if we knew who we were, we wouldn't have our pants sagging down halfway down our behinds. I think that we would treat each other with a degree of humanity that we sometimes find lacking. I think that when we go to the job interview, we would go into it with a sense of confidence that we don't have. So a knowledge of history changes everything. You cannot put enough emphasis on history. Garvey understood that. His disciple Malcolm X understood it when he said, of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. And this is an important question, because people come to me all the time and say, all that knowledge is good, but what am I going to do with it? How does that put money in my pocket? I'm saying history is indispensable, that all strong people emphasize their history all the time, weak people don't. And for African people to be the great people that we were meant to be, I think we have to go as far as to make our history sacred, even in these times of despair, even in these times of difficulty. It's the time when you most need to drink from that deep well of history and culture. And I think that that is a major reason why we find ourselves in the situation that we're in universally, is that many of us refuse to look historically at what we have done, and so therefore we don't have a sense of what we're capable of doing.
Never use the word Black Africa, not because Africans are not black. Black is an honorable word. There's nothing basically wrong with it. But because it presupposes that there is a legitimate white Africa. There is no legitimate white Africa. And so somebody says Black Africa, ask them, what other kind of Africa legitimately is that? You never say white Europe, and you never say wet rain. What other kind of rain is there other than wet rain?
Yeah, good night.
Good night, sir.
Yeah, you know, so it's a small talk. I say more and just, I say, who not talk about where I deal right now.
Yeah, so you ready for me lock you off right
now?
now?
I say, I'm Africa, I deal directly.
No, so you ready for me lock you off right now because you're going to talk
No, okay. I'm not ready for it.
All right, talk. Wait there, you see you're talking, I have to include the man right there beside me, you know. If I don't me when you're going to talk, you know, we're not that, you know.
Yeah, but me I say, Africa, you refer to, so me I say, Africa, we are refer to.
All right, go on, talk.
Yeah, me I say, my input, me I put still, you know, me I say, as long as we are African, you know, and I deal with African development, you know, me I say, we need to develop a shipping line, you know, differently, you know, if I want $1, black man to put sea and we have $1. If I want $1, and we can buy shares in it, sea and we, me say, black people necessarily have a shipping line, because that's all help us. For a certain level still. What do you think about that?
Well, Ghana have shipping line, Ghana have a navy, South Africa have a navy. I mean,
so
most of the Africans have a navy.
We in Jamaica same way. We can run some passenger boat on the water same way.
But why do you need a boat rather than a plane?
We can run cargo same way.
A plane is better. You don't think a plane is better? You don't think a plane is better rather than a ship right now?
No, man, we are dealing with unsinkable something now. Remember, I say plane engine lock off, you know. We don't have no parachute to carry down that safe, you know.
Then ship no can sink, man.
If we have a shipping line, we have some unsinkable boat that safe on the water. That's a safety, you know.
Wait, no, man. What you call unsinkable boat? There's no boat that is unsinkable, man.
So now we have unsinkable. We have the material to build it, you know.
What kind of boat you can make what is unsinkable? The Titanic, man, it believes it's unsinkable too, you know.
Yeah, but me I say bamboo is one of the greatest floating material, you know. I mean, one change from bamboo and
so you're gonna make boat for bamboo for send it go away. Miami.
No, a metal or many frame it, you know, but a bamboo will be floating, you know. Remember, say if you want a stadium for the water, you can build out a bamboo same way, you know.
Yeah,
you only want to make up your frame, you know, and use bamboo to do the floating, you know. We can build a floating market same way. We can build any kind of thing on the water same without a bamboo, you know. I want the greatest floating material in the world. You don't matter about Noah Ark and anything there. Yeah. Bamboo can build any size something on the water, you know. So if you want a train to deal with certain African development, see, we can carry our own water, we can carry our own machine, then we bulldozer, we tractor them, we animal them, see and we have the donkey, we mule, everything we want, people see and we. everything.
Yeah.
It's necessary we have a shipping line still because Marcus have a birthday today, you know. So may I say if we can come together and team up and even put $1, every black man never put $1 towards a project.
Every black man in the world.
We can get $1 a chance and see where it can be still. So how we organize same way as black people we are look towards Africa and talk about Africa same way. We have to develop a shipping line because we can't develop we can't say we are wait for now for fear individually. We have to have that Marcus you have it towards, you know, so as a Marcus you have a birthday. Today now.
Yesterday.
It's good for your reason, but say, boy, restart the Black Star Line for anywhere with the same way. Make an account where people, somebody can put anywhere in the world. Then can put $1 and say, boy, with $1 that go through the Black Star Line so we can develop some tugboat, buy some tugboat and anywhere bamboo them there.
May I tell you the truth, Bridget?
One bamboo, you know, to different, you know.
Yeah, you may say no, Bridget. May I tell you the truth? Yeah. What you say?
Well, me not hear so good. Go on again,
yeah. Hear so good. All right.
Me I hear now.
May I say, the enthusiasm and the jealousness, I can hear it come out of the eye. But you see, this bamboo thing, you know, if you go travel from here, so if you go to Africa in a bamboo boat, and that would...
No, it's not bamboo boat in a metal, build frame, you know.
Yeah, but when we are saying...
Metal, build frame, but a bamboo and the floating, that means they can't sink none at all. No sinking, no, you know.
Hear what I say, man. You have ship, you have big ship, you carry all 10,000 people and look like... We go up on ship already, we look like shopping mall and all these things.
Then we can build them things that to see and where. We are the one the bamboo them, you know. But we want bamboo till you dazzling, want millions of bamboo, you know. No, one and two, you know. So anywhere in a Jamaica and a rural people, they have bamboo same way, you know. We can gather them from a different seaport, them off, and we tugboat can go for them and draw them in a certain harbour where we are dealing with boat building, with ship building them same way. All different sites of the same way on the water. We have in a water tank, all the people in Africa short of water, you know. And we have water in a bath, in a water mine. We depend on a bath same way, you know. 120 of me didn't say that Jamaica, you know. And we people in South Africa same way, you know. So we have the material source. We have the resource same way, you know.
We have enough bamboo, you know.
We have enough bamboo. So we can hold a tank up on the water, man. Water tanker, man. We can feel anywhere, man. Anywhere water shot, we can carry water, we give them, man. Pump it off, give them. Hundreds of miles of hose, we can have same way, pump water, go anywhere in Jamaica, anywhere in a rural shot of water. As long as we have a sea, we can have any amount of water tank up on the sea. We don't see them things they develop, but we as black people have to develop them things the same way, you know.
Yes, sir.
We don't want the agricultural harm the same way. We have a ship same way. We can have a train, we can have sea train same way.
So why you have something against plane?
No, I'm not saying something against plane, but it's a ship safer. Because unthinkable, you know, that means say, in a harbor we sailing, we're not going to say nobody sink. Me don't say enough time, you have some sailboat, I think 1,000 people like man there. Sometimes 800 are dead off, you know. We don't deal with them thing there. We don't have no sinking business. Bamboo can't go down on the water. If we have anything at all, we have on the water. Look at Jamaica now. We are waiting till somebody come now from foreign country now, come run all a passenger boat around the country. From Kingston to Mobile, from Wochi to wherever. When Marcus got next one. Hold
on, man. We'll get next person a chance. Yeah, we are getting next person a chance. We're not going to make you manipulate the program, you know.
No, I'm not manipulate the program, but me just put out an idea.
Me hear the idea.
And to black people see
we hear the idea.
So what do you think about the idea?
Me think the idea is very old. If we go really know, if we go gather bamboo all over the world, if we go make bamboo boat.
Then we come together, unity and strength, you know, sir. And we come together now, you know, and gather up any amount we can gather up, see and we, you know. But everybody get a mark up, see and we for them, whatever them put, you know. Whatever input a man put, you know. We get a mark up on it, you know, because it's a business we are going on, you know. So when every dollar come together, we have 100 million, 200 million, 300 million, when it's spent. Black people get them mark up on it same way. It's an investment, you know.
Yes, sir.
We're going to
move, you know. Yeah, brethren, we're going to move. Because you're not include the other man. We're going to move. All right. This is the cutting edge. And I see it. You say, you know, you do. All right. The man that talk about make some boat with bamboo and things to go around the world and demonstrate how great it is by setting up some dollar account. All right. Cutting edge. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, blessed.
Bless up, MUTA, you know, give thanks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, So the bridging beside there, and I never really hear him talk about a couple things still.
Okay. Right.
And so for instance, I do like a reading for like Southeast Asia and the African presence, and some of the material when we come across involve or it talk about things like, say for instance, the Shang people we mentioned, it relates the karate or the kung fu with some of the people who come from places like Punt, you know, Somalia and those places. And would I like if the person could elucidate upon that?
Well, if you're asking me about martial arts, I would just say that the earliest known example of martial arts that I'm aware of actually can be found in Egypt. And okay. Egypt is in Africa, always has been in Africa, and there's a series of tombs that are about 4,000 years old. I've climbed in those tombs, and you can see black men in martial arts positions, whether they be kung fu or karate or jiu-jitsu, I can't say. But the earliest known examples of martial arts that I'm aware of are definitely found in Egypt. I've seen them. I photographed them, and this is long before Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. So like with most things, you can find the origins of things, including martial arts, in Africa, and this is a good example of it.
Okay, so the bridging we there talk about from Japan, the first shogun,
yes.
Is it never specialize in like martial arts, or isn't there any evidence or would I say, you know, in specializing in martial arts that would say, for instance, be the inception of Japanese, you know, shogunism, if that's it?
Well, a shogun is just a military ruler, and the first shogun is a brother, we believe, named Sakanoye Tamur Moraro, who lived about 1,200 years ago. All people have martial arts, like all people have music, all people have dancing, all people have language, I guess you could say. So martial arts, again, seems to have been found first in Africa. Now, the evidence that Africans took those martial arts to the Far East is a little different. There is a belief that a brother named Bodhidharma came from India hundreds and hundreds of years ago and took modern Asian martial arts from South Asia, that is India, into China and Japan. And it's just another chapter in African history that needs to be further written and developed. But there's no doubt that it first comes from Africa, like most things, and it spreads from there.
All right, Bridget?
Yeah, man. Give thanks.
Yeah, man.
Thank you, my brother.
Yeah. Cutting Edge, RFM. Yeah, the Brazilian Capoeira dance also, which it's a kind of martial art.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I think that once we start looking at Africa in a different way, you know, it just changes everything. For example, the first known mining comes from southern Africa. It's about 47,000 years old. Mm-hmm. The earliest known use of mathematics comes from Swaziland. It's about 37,000 years old. Africans are the first people to bury the dead. Africans are the first people to build a house, to wear shoes, to build a city, to chart the stars in the heavens. And these things are important because we're trying to raise African consciousness. Even here in Jamaica, we want people to say we are Africans and what happens in Africa matters to us, and we use history as the basis of that. So once we start talking about all the different things Africans did, it gives us a newfound sense of pride. It gives us a newfound sense of confidence. So we're not just ego tripping. We're not just strutting our stuff. We're not just boasting and bragging. We're trying to fortify our sense of identity and our confidence in who we are, what we are, and therefore what we are capable of doing, what we're capable of being.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
MUTA.
You're up on the air, man.
All right. Good night, and good night to the doctor. This is the Thunder from Cane River. I want to really ask you a question if you think it's possible for for them to celebrate a day of Martin Luther King, because he contribute greatly to the cause of black people, although he is American.
Yeah, Martin Luther King made great contributions. A lot of people don't know the other side of Dr. King. We hear the speech, I have a dream, I've been to the mountaintop, turn the other cheek. That's one side of Dr. King. Dr. King went to Africa. Dr. King went to Africa before Malcolm X did. Martin Luther King gave a brilliant speech called I'm Black and I'm Beautiful. Martin Luther King was one of the first people to come out against the war in Vietnam. Martin Luther King talked about black power at one point in time. So there's another side of Dr. King, and certainly he needs to be celebrated.
And I told you that, the reason why Marcus Garvey is so celebrated because he was a more Pan-Africanist. He had a more Pan-Africanist perspective, and he was more international in terms of his reach. He started an organization that reached clear into Australia, clear into South and Central America. I think Martin Luther King is seen more of a kind of American black hero, where Marcus Garvey is seen as
an African. Yeah,
no, I know, but where I say in terms of him work in the civil rights movement, Marcus Garvey came out at the same. Well, we could have talked about Malcolm X in the same light. We could have talked why we don't celebrate
Malcolm too.
Yeah, so it's a whole heap of celebration. We have to go celebrate.
We can celebrate one significant for the African American.
Yeah.
Well, different people make different contributions. Yeah. But we also know that Dr. King came to the shrine of Marcus Garvey around 64, 65, 66 and acknowledged the importance of Garvey historically. So I'm just saying there's a different side of Dr. King that a lot of us are not aware of. And certainly he made very valuable contributions.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Martin Luther King came to Jamaica and write a lot of in works. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Say that again?
Martin Luther King wrote a lot of his works in Jamaica.
No, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
He came to Jamaica. A lot of his written works was written from here.
Okay.
From here in Jamaica. In a St. Elizabeth too. It's a weird thing. Okay. So we're there with you upon the cutting edge, and as we say, we have RUNOKO RASHIDI here with us. How more when you leaving, actually?
My brother, I'm gonna leave in about
when you leave in Jamaica.
I'm leaving in about 9 hours.
You leave in Jamaica?
Yeah, I fly back to the United States this afternoon, unfortunately.
And then where you go after this?
I spend a couple of weeks in the U.S. and then I go to Zimbabwe. And I'm going to help participate in an education conference designed to develop the history curriculum and social sciences curriculum for the whole continent of Africa. It's going to be historic because Africa, for the most part, still teaches history from the perspective of the Queen.
Yes.
They're still teaching history from the colonial period. Africa is independent in name, but in terms of its psychology and the way it sees the world, it's still very much colonized. And as Carter G. Woodson says, when you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. Stephen Biko said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Yeah. So by doing this work, we're talking about doing this in Zimbabwe, we're hoping we can free those chains of psychological bondage.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes.
MUTA.
Yeah, man.
You're going to ask Virgin if it is a black race that carry holy here.
He might ask if it's black people alone carry woolly hair.
As far as I know, yes. And not all black people have woolly hair. Some black people have naturally straight hair. Some black people have naturally blonde hair or red hair. So what you can see if you go to Southern Africa, for example, you see a people called the Khoi and another group of people called the San. We know them as Bushmen and Hottentots. And the first time I saw them, I said, my God, those are Chinese. And then I got closer and listened to them, and I realized those were black people. Now, normally, back then, I would have said they look like Asians. They look like Chinese. Now, I would say a lot of Chinese look like Africans because Africans carry the genetic or the physical makeup of all other people. But that's a good question. I've never heard anybody ask me, do people other than black people have woolly hair? But as far as I know, that's a trait that only black people themselves have.
Okay.
You understand that, brethren? It's not every black person here is woolly.
Yeah.
And not because him here not woolly, him is not black.
See.
You understand?
Yeah.
But it's only black people have woolly here.
Yes.
All right.
That I know of.
All right, give thanks, brethren.
Respect.
Yes. Yeah, that really it's a good question.
Very good question.
It's a very good question, seriously, because the identification physically sometimes get thrown off because of the colonization periods and because of intermingling.
You know, one of the most interesting areas that we really haven't looked at, and that is even relatively new for me, is black people in the Pacific. Because that area has not been written about from an African perspective. But if you go to places like Fiji or East New Britain or Bougainville Island, you will find black people deep in the Pacific, in some cases with natural platinum blonde hair, sometimes straight, sometimes nappy. And these people aggressively tell you, we come from Africa, and ask you, where do you come from? And this is exciting to me because these are our sisters and brothers. When they see you, when you see them, there's an immediate sense of identification. You know that we are sisters and brothers, and yet nobody that I'm aware of in history has written about them from an African perspective. So it's exciting not only to write history, but it's exciting to be a part of making history, because we are reestablishing these bonds with African people all over the world, and to me that's very exciting.
Yeah, but I mean, the brethren asked a question a while ago. Give me a thought here. You know of anybody who ever do any study upon the texture of hair around the world and how it came to be?
Well, I guess some anthropologists have done that. Nothing specific that I'm aware of. But we know that hair, like everything else, is a result of environment.
Yeah.
And what causes some of us to have straight hair, some of us to have nappy hair, naturally, what causes the color of the hair has to do something with the environment, maybe with the water, with the degree of sunshine. I don't know. But certainly that's a part of our historical study that we need to develop. Nobody has really done it specifically that I'm aware of.
Because it's not necessarily mixed. It's not necessarily mixture of race.
Not at all.
Cause your ear to have a certain texture.
You can find black folk who who have the physical makeup of virtually every people. I've seen black people with naturally dark red hair. You see some people thin and tall like the Tutsis and the Maasai. And then you see people like the Twa, the so-called pygmies. You see black people with a variety of features. So again, I think it just goes to the diversity of black people. You can find it in Africa, and I'm talking about unmixed people. So we need to define again, what do Africans look like? What is an African, and what is the significance of that?
Yes, this is the Cutting Edge, and RFM. Oh, the line them look now. Why don't stop texting up? All right. Well, you know, when them they say, Peter that say, if your complexion high, if your complexion low.
High. If your complexion low.
Hey, she put me on a phone over there, so you know, Rasta. I can't reach a phone over there, so you know, press a phone to make me hear it, you know. So I'm on a white seat over there, so.
And it has been said that we range in complexion from snow to crow and bright to night.
Operator, I don't put no phone call on a phone, you know, Rasta. Yeah. Yes.
Greetings, my black brothers.
Yeah. Irie.
Yes, this is Sister Tamaray. I'm calling from London.
Okay. Give thanks.
Yes, I am just commenting on the subject matter regarding African presence around the world, which I am actually studying and documenting at present. And it's interesting that you mentioned the hair, because I'm actually specifically targeting the hair.
Okay, so what you found out? I mean, you reach any conclusions of any of those findings?
Well, an African shaman was speaking to me and giving me some insights regarding the spiritual aspects of our hair. And the reason that we haven't noticed that every other race has came from the African, because before there wasn't the word race, because there was no such thing. because the planet was populated only by black people.
Yeah, that we understand.
And this is why Elijah Muhammad always spoke of the Asiatic black man. That's why our presence is so much over the Asian world, because that was how we deem Africa now, was in the ancient times, this was where one of the original places that we were from, not like we left Africa and went there. There were 12 nations all around the globe, and this place was one of the main places. So it's now a lot of the theory of us leaving Africa is being more studied carefully as to why these presence are so strong in these places, being that it's an ancient, I'll put it this way, some of the mounds in America that are older than some of the pyramids in Africa. With that, they're studying and finding out certain other things, and it's because of these shamans
who found that out. Hold on, sister. Hold on.
And approaching 2012, they're coming out with some information.
Sister.
And this is what I'm studying at the moment.
Yeah, I'm asking, who found out that there are pyramids in South America that is older than the pyramids?
Okay, because I'm going to have to elaborate on it, because I contacted your office the other day to link you about coming in, because I'm coming to Jamaica soon to share the information. So I'm going to leave my details after this.
No, but you can't say it now. Say it now, man. You're the clear England and you're the on the program. We can't wait till you come to England to say that. Where the information comes from that you have. You know have that RUNOKO? You know have that?
No, I've never heard evidence of that.
Yeah. Where you get the evidence that there are pyramids?
This is from an African elder.
What's his name?
It's called his name by Blackroot Science. It's called Blackroot Science, and it's
Blacks in Science. Is Ivan Van Sertima right? Blacks in Science.
Pardon me?
The title that you just mentioned was written by Ivan Van Sertima. Blacks in Science.
No, it's called Blackroot Science.
Blackroot what?
Blackroot Science.
Root as in the movie Root.
Yeah.
Blackroot Science.
Okay.
And it's apparently why he's telling you why there is this strong African presence, and no one can make a headway of why this African presence. Every single continent you go to, Mexico, everywhere you go, you can find a strong African presence.
Yeah.
But the theory is that we were leaving from the continent of Africa and going there. But nobody studied the theory that we were already originally on these lands. We never left from anywhere and went there. These were 12 nations that were a brother and sister nation, basically. And they all interchangeably went, because the lands were joined at the time as well. So it wasn't like anybody had to cross any amount of, water and all these things. The land, then we ended up having land separation. So he was going back from before the lands were separated.
Sister, let me say something. First, there's only one race, and that's the human race, which originated in Africa. And yes, the continent.
But their theory is that there was never a word race, because we never knew the word race. All right,
well, whatever term you want to use. There's only one species of humanity, which originated in one place, and that place is the continent that we now call Africa. Now, yes, humanity is scattered all over the world, and yes, those continents were all joined together, but the separation of the continents took place so many tens of millions of years ago that it really has no direct effect on modern humanity. Humanity migrated from Africa to these various places, and they took their science, their technology, their culture with them. That's why you find Africans all over the world.
Okay, all right. There's a school of thought. That says that in the evolution of man, like Europe, Asia, Africa, there was not a systematic movement of people, but actually people, which I think is that the sister said. There's a school of thought that say that white people never descended from Africans, but they developed in Europe as a group, separate from Africans as a people developing as a group? Or you ever hear that theory?
Oh, yeah, I've heard it. I think that the evidence says, you mentioned Ivan Van Sertima, there are others, Diop, Charles Finch, and others, that humanity came from Africa, and some of those Africans went into Europe, and they were impacted by those Ice Age conditions that changed them. They actually mutated, so that the European of today is a kind of a mutated African, a kind of a, Ivan Van Sertima called them pink Africans. So everybody comes from Africa, but everybody is also a product of their environment. And if there's a dramatic environmental shift, then that would change that person physically. Now, I'm not concerned about that so much in Europe. What I'm concerned about is the psychological change that those Africans went through, so that you come from a warm environment where women were very important to an environment that's icy cold for tens of thousands of years, that produces an icy cold mentality that says survival of the fittest, might makes right, a dog is a man's best friend, and you develop a harsh worldview. And it's that harsh worldview that Africans are confronting with today, and we haven't figured out how to deal with that.
But there's also another view that this Ice Age theory was also a way in which to, for these anthropologists and, they go around the world and they have their theories. But my theory or school of thought is coming from a genetic, a concentrated genetical study, because I remember an aunt said to me while I was researching, I was putting a point to her regarding the genetic development of the Caucasian race, and she said to me, I elaborated on it because she's strongly a Christian and a Christian beliefs, and we are all one family and so on. And I said to her, have you heard of Elijah Muhammad? And he's speaking of the theory of how the Caucasian race was originated. And when I explained it to her, she said to me, interestingly, when I was growing up, there was never a Chihuahua, and now we've got a Chihuahua. So now she's not too much on a path where it's an impossible theory that there were a genetic.
So you believe what Elijah Muhammad said?
Races now, or the human race.
So you believe what Elijah Muhammad said?
Before there was never a theory of race. There was only one.
No, we understand about now.
And then the races came from those people.
Yeah, we understand about
now. I'm a strong believer in that theory.
Yeah, but I'm asking you if you believe what Elijah Muhammad said. You believe what Elijah Muhammad said in the creation of white people? Because also this Elijah Muhammad theory came out in the study as well. Yeah, but I'm asking you if you accept what Elijah Muhammad said about the origin of white people.
Oh yes, completely. This is proven. This is a proven theory.
No, it's not a proven theory. It's not a proven theory. It's a theory, not a proven theory. Is that theory?
Well, I can say from my research so far, which is true that what you just said.
You read the book, The Origin of White People?
It seems as though it is very, very plausible.
That they were made in a laboratory?
No, not that they were from controlled breeding process.
No, but all right. There's a book named The Origin of White People.
Yeah.
Elijah Muhammad. He have a book about the origin of white people. So I don't know if you ever read it yet, but when I used to go to school...
Oh, yes.
No, all right. Let me say something to you. I really want to ask Rashida something about this idea, right? All right. Rashida, would you accept that the Neanderthals is a group of people, or is the... Or you say the Neanderthals in history?
Well, the Neanderthals are what we call a dead end. That you have modern humanity, which is commonly called Homo sapiens, sapien or wise man. Yeah. But you have archaic forms of humanity too. Which is Neanderthals. Well, Neanderthal exactly is an archaic form of humanity, not modern human, and they died out.
All right. That is an aspect of it. But the Neanderthals existed in Europe.
Yes.
All right. If the Neanderthal, well, the theory is that they died out.
Mm-hmm. I believe they did.
Yeah, because you have other people saying that they mix with humans. The Neanderthal mixed with humans in Europe. Mm. I don't know if you ever hear that theory.
Well, what I would say is it's very interesting. All these theories are very, very interesting. But I think that ultimately we have to look and say, what does the evidence say? Not what we think or how we feel or how we theorize, but what is the evidence?
All right, the evidence show you that the Neanderthals died out.
That's what it seems to suggest.
All right, there's an argument, there's an saying that there's an evidence that the Neanderthals mixed with the people who was what you call it, exploring the movements, which is really the Africans moving into Africa, and thousands of years through the Ice Age, Worm 1, Worm 2, you have this so-called connection with the Neanderthals. All right, why I really bring up the Neanderthals is to argue about this thing about Africans and the movement of African people all over the world. And could there be a possibility that this idea, this train of thought that says that is not all people come from one source, but there is what we call a system that is saying people rose up from different continents, independent of the African, especially like what we talk about the Neanderthals. Because would you say that the Neanderthals evolved from Africans?
I would say that, yeah, they evolved from archaic guys. Here's how the theory runs. First, you have the archaic humans or even pre-humans called Australopithecines, including the one called Dinknesh or Lucy. And from them, or from a common ancestor, comes another group called the hominids. And you have Homo habilis, which means handy man. Then you have erect man, or Homo erectus, and then Homo sapiens, and then Homo sapiens sapien, which is wise man. And I think that that's what the evidence supports, that there's a gradual evolution, that that the earliest forms of humanity developed in Africa, but also the earliest modern humans developed in Africa, of which Neanderthals were not a part of. And those early modern humans spread to all parts of the world, and they evolved from there. But again, I go back to the idea that there's only one race, and that's the human race.
I would, I'm going to go now, but I wanted the opportunity, because I'm coming home soon, to come and present, as you're saying, the facts and the information that I've gathered, and with all the extensive research I've been doing on the hair and but
you never tell me nothing about the ear, you know. You got
hair.
Yeah, but you got in Elijah Muhammad, you never tell me nothing about the ear. Is the ear would it really start out
exactly, but the studies about our hair is that they're not using our hair to even use for lighting, for power. That, you know, for renewable sources of power. They're using Asian boy has just collected black hair and used it to give his village light.
No, the question was, you see, textures of ears from around the world.
Yes.
What caused an African in the Pacific to have like a different texture of ear from an African in Africa
and
when they are not mixed?
Well, apparently it's because of the magnetism of the planet. And the fact that we are the only ones, or the only people on the planet that are the original people that are from here. Our bodies are intertwined with the planet, but we don't realize it. Because you notice everyone else's hair goes down to the ground, and ours.
Yeah, but you have Africans who ear grow down to the ground too.
So we grow like the trees and the ground.
No, sister, wait, man, I can't make you get it. You have Africans' ear that grow down to the ground too. That's what we was talking about. You have African ear.
Yes, but you were also saying what is deemed as an African. You're also discussing what we have to try and differentiate on what is deemed as an African.
Yeah, and I am saying
so there were certain distinctive traits that was left for us to differentiate ourselves from everyone else.
But what we're saying, you say Africans' ear grow up. I tell you that you have Africans' ear that grow down too. Well, that is not mixed.
Well, yeah, in theory, but
it's not a theory. No, it's not a theory. No, but you mean theory. It's not a theory. I don't know theory we are talking about. A natural thing where you can't see. I don't theory. You have Africans
here who go down. Here and take a Caucasian person here, you won't find the same.
We're not talking about no Caucasian, you know. We're not talking about Caucasian. We're talking about the idea that Africans here grow up and Caucasian here grow down. When I say you have African here, we grow down too. We don't mix with Caucasian.
Namely, which Africans are those?
You're talking about Aboriginal Australians, Nubians, Dravidians, many black people.
Yeah, but those Africans that grow down, they still have a natural kink in it. It's not complete.
Not the Nubians who don't. The Nubians are people who live in southern Egypt today. I was just there 3 weeks ago. These are black people.
Yeah.
Black, with naturally straight hair. No mixture.
But that's what I'm saying. That if you test that hair, it's still going to have more nutrient than everybody else's hair because of the fact of the carbon content of the hair.
We're not talking about the nutrients, sister, the talk was not about the nutrients in the ear. The talk was about growing up to identify. We were talking about identification.
Yes, because the most identifiable trait of the ear that people different between being African is the natural
is the one who grow up.
That grows out and goes up.
Well,
so there's a lot of mutations and there's a lot of, but the original African hair.
Yeah, grow up.
Which if you even take the ones
so you say the Nubian them are not original African. So you say the African them when a Nubian are not original African then.
No, I'm saying that there's a lot of mutations that have taken place even among Africans that has caused straight hair, or even the ones here who seem straight. If you take it on a biological, molecular level, it's still going to be different from everyone else there that goes down because that person is an African.
Well, I don't doubt you. I don't doubt you when you say that. I don't doubt that. But I would say to say that Africans here grow up and Europeans here grow down is not true.
Yeah, that's a loose statement, but that is the most physical type of an African.
Yeah, all right, sister.
That anybody would deem as an African trait.
I think we have to take culture.
A lot of people didn't know why our hair grows up and everybody else's hair goes down.
Yeah, but you go back to that again, and it's not everybody here. You see, you're going back to the same thing again. Anyway, give thanks, sister. Give thanks. All right. This is the continent, and I have that was a call from England. I mean, I know there's enough English people that listen. There's enough England people listen to this program. I know. I tell you, them, especially like it's morning now. Where you say the webcasts are done out. If not easy, if I look for the time, if got 90 minutes over.
In the morning, yeah.
If got 90 minutes over time, Thank you very much, sir. Webcast in the continent. This is the second time we do it, don't it? You know, say you're going to do it next week again. Yes. Okay, so that is the end of the webcasting for this program tonight, but we still continue because it's just 19 minutes past 1. And you know, say they're on the continent. Definitely. Yes.
Good night.
Good night.
Dr. Rashid, who did you say invented the first windmill?
Well, the people who are credited with inventing the first windmill are the people called the Dravidians.
Can I spell that one, please?
Dravidians, Dravidians, and they invented it in the country that we now call Pakistan about 4,500 years ago.
Can I spell it one last time on liquor store?
Dravidians, Dravidians.
You get that, Regine? Yeah. They must get that. You must get that, trust me. The job. Yeah, if you come from Taiwan or Taiwan, you're African. You think feet attach easy, That's it. You come from Taiwan, you come from Taiwan.
He also said Russia. In Russia, you have Africans like Alexander Pushkin.
Yes, Pushkin, the
Russian equivalent to Shakespeare.
Poet. Yes.
In France, you have Africans like Alexander Dumas, who wrote the Three Musketeers.
Yes.
So you have a remarkable imprint of Africans all over the world. Ancient America, a civilization called the Olmec, black people among the Maya. So why should we be ashamed of who we are as African people? We have a history that is second to none and the greatest story that's barely been told. And Brother Muta is a part of telling that story, and so am I.
Give time. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Muta. and Dr. Rashidi, big up on yourself.
All right, sir.
Yeah. You ever check the features of Nelson Mandela yet, and the Chinese? Just look closely at it. And there's a movie by the name of The Gods Are Against Me. The Bushman. Just look closely at the
Bushman. No, name some man. The gods must be crazy.
Yeah.
The movie name, The Gods Must Be Crazy, about the Bushman, them, with the battle where them chewing.
Yeah. Look for them features and look for them Chinese.
Those are very ancient people. The Bushmen are also called the San, S-A-N, and they are
not much great years after we talk again.
They're at least 40,000 years old. And so instead of saying that they look like the Chinese, it's easy to say the Chinese got their features from them. Yes.
Yeah. It's like somebody I say, me look like my daughter. When I say my daughter look like me.
That's right.
Yes. Cut it edge. Yes.
Hello, good night.
Good night.
I notice you, I just want a question for the brother. What can you tell me about the Tar Heights? One, I'm going to hang up and listen to him. And secondly, the Malachi York as a African scholar. What can you tell me about those two things? Thank you.
Now, the first question I didn't understand.
What can you tell me about the Tar Heights? The Tar Heights in the context of African development?
I'm not familiar with
Tar Heights. What is that?
Yes, the Tar Heights. Those are the early African, they call it pygmies.
Well, the pygmies are called the Twa. And sometimes the plural word is Batwa. And these are very, very, very ancient people that are found in the rainforest today of Central Africa. Very small people who have a very, very ancient civilization. Some people would call them primitive, but you don't find murder among them. You don't find rape among them. They don't steal from one another. And so I think that they are the descendants of probably the earliest humans on the planet. You have very ancient African populations. You have the Twa in Central Africa. You have the Khoi or the Nama, also known as Hottentots in Southern Africa. You have the San in Southern Africa. These are very, very, very ancient people who don't have a written history. And so a lot of what we know about them is speculation. But I think that there are many, many things that we can learn from them. And I've had the good fortune of being around all three groups of them.
I've been amongst the Twa in Cameroon. The Cameroons. I've been down there. Yes, the next question was the Malachi York.
Malachi York is he's many things. A leader, political activist. He's in prison now. He's incarcerated in the state of Georgia. A lot of people think very, very highly of him. He's controversial. I've never met the man. He's done a lot of writing, and many people think that he's worthy of study. So beyond that, I really can't tell you
much. There's a lot of books that put out by him. I mean, I have so much books. And
the people who, I guess, are his followers, or maybe the movement, it's called the Nuwabians.
Yes.
And
Nuwabians in Jamaica.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on them, I guess.
Okay, so, all right. We could go here. Yes, Cotton Edge.
Greetings, Brother Muta. Holy Martha.
Okay.
How you doing?
I know it's Jamaica you call from and not Gambia, you know. I see you last night, so it's not Gambia you call from. Don't tell me it's Gambia you call from.
No, I'm calling from Kingston.
Okay.
Greetings, Dr. Rashidi.
Greetings,
my question is, could you talk about the Hottentot Venus and show the correlation between that image portraying and trying to disrespect? Well, I know the image is tried to dehumanize black women, even though at the same time it tried to signify our beauty. But can you correlate that with also the Jezebel image, the nanny image, and the constant trail of negative images through the media to denigrate and stereotype African women?
All right. First of all, the word Hottentot is not an African word. I believe it's Dutch. and it just indicates either their inability to imitate the African language, or maybe their downright refusal. So these people are in South Africa called Khoi, Khoi, and in Southwest Africa or Namibian they're called Nama, Nama. And these are relatively short, relatively light-skinned black people with very nappy hair, and the women tend to have big behinds, so what scientists call stereotypia. Now, the Hottentot Venus was a black woman, a Khoi woman from South Africa named Saartjie Baartman, and she was persuaded to go to Europe about, at least 120 years ago, and told that if she went to Europe and put her body on display, she could make a lot of money. So she went to Europe, and she was turned into kind of a freak. She was put in circuses and carnivals, and people made fun of her large hips. When she died at a very, very young age, her genital organs were cut out, and her brain was removed and put in a glass of alcohol and put on display in a museum in France. It is during the time of Nelson Mandela that he persuaded the French government to allow those body parts to be taken back to South Africa and given a proper burial. Now, some people say that it's from the images of the so-called Hottentot Venus that the fashion called the bustle developed. And in answer to your question, this is just a part of the process, yes, of black women being degraded, being humiliated around the world. But at the time, this is what Europeans were doing. You had a brother called El Negro, who was a bushman, a San, who was put on display by a taxidermist in a Spanish museum. But this is what happened at the time. You had a brother named Otabinga, who they called the pygmy in the zoo. A brother who was put on display in the monkey cage in the Bronx Zoo with an orangutan about 110 years ago. But they did that to other Europeans. You might recall a movie called The Elephant Man, where there was a white man named John Merrick who was physically deformed and put on display. Geronimo was put on display. So about that time, this is the age of Victorian England, and this is the height of white Anglo-Saxon supremacy. So it was not unusual for them to put what they called inferior peoples on display, because in their eyes it denoted their superiority. And the Hottentot Venus comes from that period of time. Saartjie Baartman is her actual name.
Yeah, can you imagine that it took a man in the 20th century, Nelson Mandela, to make those body parts be returned to its original birthplace.
And I talked to people who were there when the body parts were returned to South Africa, and it got to be very, very emotional. So it's a very interesting story.
Yes, yes.
And you know, another person we could talk about is Truganini. Truganini is the last full-blood Tasmanian. There is a place called Tasmanian, and all the full-blood Tasmanians were wiped out. And this woman was actually put on display also in the Tasmanian Museum. She was strung up with piano wire, and there she remained until the 1940s, when her body was taken off display. And in 1976, 100 years after her death, she was cremated, and her body and the ashes scattered at sea. So it's a pretty shameful period in European history.
You know, I have a picture of the brother that them put in an exhibition in a New York there.
Otabinga, yes, I have photographs of all of them.
I have a photograph, yeah, okay. A photograph of me in the cage. Yes, Mama.
And the final part of the question, can you show how that correlates to 20th century images that are portrayed in the media, the step and fetch, the mammy image, and the Jezebel, and how those images are portrayed today in the 21st century?
Well, there's not a direct relationship, but it's all a part of a process where the image of the black man and the black woman has been denigrated and made to look inferior and buffoonish. So there's not a direct link, but it's a part of that same process that you could say began with Saartjie Baartman or the Hottentot Venus and goes on until 2011. It's not new. And it apparently is going to be here with us for a while until we control our own image.
And what do those images look like today? Like, can you give an example? Because I knew I'm saying mammy image, Jezebel image, and step and fetch, but maybe some of our listeners may not understand what we mean when we use those terms and what those terms mean today.
It look like some of them, the images today look like some of them hip-hop video and dancehall video. That is where it represents today, you know. That same image of what you talk about is the images now that we look on television in our living room and say black women being downgraded in this kind of way, you know. But the problem with it now is that we are doing it for ourselves now, rather than white people are doing it to we.
Well, it goes back to what y'all said about Carter Woodson and miseducation of the Negro.
Miseducation, totally.
The job has been well done. Mental enslavement is in full effect. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again in Jamaica.
Oh, I look forward to it, sister.
Yeah, man. That's the side from Gambia. She lives in Jamaica, but she's from Gambia.
All right, good.
Yeah, she's a Gambian lady. Yes, I mean, it kind of weird that a thing that happened so much 100 years ago got rectified just in an hour time, which is just the other day.
Well, one of the sad things, as you pointed out, is now we do these things to ourselves and we justify it.
Yes.
We justify our portrayal as buffoons and coons and idiots. And, sometimes, as Garvey said, we can be our own worst enemy.
Yes. And we are trying to be our worst enemy without any help. Yes, this is the cutting edge. We have a short time leave, so make you side. Yes, cutting edge.
Hello.
Yes.
Muta Baruka.
Yes, sir.
Good night, sir. Good morning to your guests.
Good morning.
I have a concern, historically, how the Arabs got into Africa, the northern part of Africa, because in my days in school, we were not taught that Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya were all African countries. Not until Gaddafi tried to form what was then called the African Union, or the forerunner, the Association of African States. How did these Arabs got into Africa? Because when you look at Sudan, and how the southern Sudanese have been treated by the president of Sudan, who is now the president of northern Sudan, how they got into Africa. I would like your guests to elaborate on that for me.
They're invaders of Africa. The same reason those white people got to South Africa. So they're invaders, or they're the descendants of invaders. It's not mysterious. The first groups of them may have come in as migrants or immigrants, as peaceful traders, but the Arabs invaded Egypt in 641 and 642. It wasn't long before they conquered it. Egypt was like a broken reed, as they say at that time. And they moved in from one country to another. They went into Tunisia. They went into Libya. And Algeria, they had a very, very hard fight. And the people that they fought were called Berbers. And the Europeans knew them as Moors. And one of the greatest of the Berber Moorish leaders is a black woman named Al-Kahina in Algeria. And then they moved into Morocco. Most of them ultimately converted.
Yes, Morocco. I had forgotten Morocco is a part of it.
Most of them converted to Islam, and some of those same Africans participated in the Moorish invasion of Spain in 710 and 711. So the people in North Africa today are largely Arab, non-African, or the descendants of non-Africans, and they are there as a result of invasion.
You know, I tell you this, we went to Morocco, and if you look at Morocco as it is now, you see an Arab look. But if you go into the Atlas Mountains, you see, we call it blue people. Them black till them blue. I have photos with me and them. I will take pictures with them where you would have never know, say, that kind of black people exist in a Morocco. Because most of the time when you see pictures of Morocco, you see the brown Arab-speaking, Arab-looking person, but there is a group, indigenous group, that is still there. Amongst the Berbers, them still exists in a Morocco. And if you go Atlas Mountain, you see them.
Now,
what's the name of your guest, Dr.
Rashidi.
Dr. Rashid. My problem is how the northern Arabs are treated separate from the rest of Africa. The other Africans don't get the same privilege like what the northern so-called Africans have gotten.
Well, that's true. You can find black populations, though, as Brother Muta pointed out, throughout North Africa, especially in the south. In Libya, southern Tunisia, from what I gather. I've seen them myself. Southern Algeria, which I've only read about. Gaddafi, I do have some degree of respect for, because Gaddafi, I think, attempted to identify with Africa even more than his own Arab roots. So, yes, it's a very different group of people. I don't regard them as African, and I suppose Africans have to look at it and decide what is their future in North Africa.
Because these lots of these school children in Jamaica in particular don't know. Some of them are not taught that the northern, where these Arabs live, is a part of the African continent.
Well, we've talked about that to some extent, these designations, Black Africa or Africa south of the Sahara. At one point, all of Africa was truly a black continent, and I hope and pray that it will be again one day. But we have to deal with the descendants of the Boers in South Africa, the Indians in East Africa, and the Arabs in North Africa. It's not going to be easy.
Yes, Dr. Rashid. Dr. Ben is still alive?
Dr. Ben is still alive. Dr. Ben is 92 or 93. He lives in Harlem.
I used to listen to his lectures.
He's still hanging on.
Still hanging on?
Yes,
I'm happy for that.
He's in poor health, though.
Well, continue to enjoy the last 9 hours.
Thank you, my brother.
Unless that 9 hours, though.
Yes.
All right, 8 hours then.
All right, give thanks. Yes, this is the Cutting Edge at IRFM to the last team. Yes, Cutting Edge.
Yes, MUTA.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to ask you guys a question. Because it kind of create a confusion with some time frame. Him just talk about him as the Bushman.
Yeah.
Him said those people about the 40,000 years old. But away from that, all the continents, there are some program come on, like documentary, we show that before the whole continent, like the 5 continents was in one, before it split up, and how people get to cross is because people cross over to these continents before the earth split up by different way of volcano or earthquake. Would you comment on that for us? Because you say, when you look on the Bible history, get just to 6,000 to 10,000 years old and nothing beyond that from the Bible. So that creates a lot of confusion and even people who go to church and all that. So want him comment on that, because I like the time on me just listen.
Well, the Bible is not a history book. It's mostly a book of fables, mythologies based on faith, but it's not a historical document. And yes, again, I get the question about the continents being all joined together. Certainly they were joined together, but the continents broke apart in large measure tens of millions of years ago. And we're talking about modern humanity. And modern humanity is only, according to scientific accounts, is only about 300,000 years ago. So if modern humanity is only 300,000 years old, maybe a little more than that, and the continents broke apart 10, 20, 50 million years ago, then the Africans could not have been in these places at that time. So the Africans who are in these parts of the world are there in relatively recent times, meaning within the last 100,000 years. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm gone, but there's a documentary that will play on this program, The Real Eve, and it narrated by Danny Glover.
Yeah, excellent documentary.
Yeah, and it traces the DNA of the different people, and when it go right forward to this one African woman, and it shows you the migration, the path that the migration take to reach this level, this stage of existence and all,
Yeah, it's an excellent documentary. I think that we can all develop theories. We can say this is plausible, this makes sense to us. But as a historian, I have to go based on the evidence that we see. And again, just to repeat, there's no doubt that humanity evolved in Africa and spread from Africa to the other parts of the world. So Africa is the mother continent.
Of course.
And African people are the original people on the planet Earth.
Definitely. Yes, Cutting Edge.
Yes, MUTA.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there are more than here. I think this question is more for you than Dr. Rashid.
Okay, I did prefer you ask him a question still than me, because you have me all the while to ask. No, I say, you have me all the while to ask question and answer, so I would have preferred for you to direct the question to the doctor.
Well, I'm not sure. Well, the question is to the Jamaica, you see.
All right. Ask.
Well, the question is, some little while back I read this article by Mark Wignell was giving a story after a woman saw a child in a hairdresser's and called her a beautiful African, and the child started to cry. And then when the mother came back and discovered why the child was crying, she basically abused the woman for calling her child an African. So I was a bit puzzled by that because the times I was living in Jamaica, I didn't have a sense that people were that hostile to the idea of being called an African.
Well, trust me, Reggie, it is that way. It is that way.
Pardon?
It is that way. You have some sisters, especially if you're going out at the bank and say, what, my beautiful African queen. Don't call me an African queen. Don't come here with no Rasta talk. Me and no Rasta, no call me no African.
Yeah, that is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's I think deteriorated since I left. Because
where you calling from? Where you calling from? Where you calling from?
Pardon?
Where you calling from?
I'm calling from London, man. London,
how long ago you go to England?
1988.
Brethren, if you ever know much things happen since 1988 till now, we reverse things. You know, you don't believe every man. I won't if I reverse, I'll go on since 1988. I won't if I reverse, I'll go on since the day before yesterday. Trust me.
The thing that shocked me is the level of reaction the child had. Because I'm thinking I would expect maybe an adult to be that hostile, but a child to cry because she was calling African. I just found that a bit astonishing.
Yeah, well, they did an experiment with some dolls, you know. Black dolls and white dolls amongst a group of black children, you know, and white children. And most of the children, the black children, choose the white dolls because them say the black doll them ugly. It look like them. They actually say them not choose it because it look like them. So them choose the white doll.
I was on the impression Jamaica was a little bit more open to being African.
Yeah, we're kind of open, but we're close too. It's a paradox. Jamaica is really a big paradox, you know. It's like we give the world Marcus Garvey, Rastafari, Bob Marley and everything there, yet still we have the way name, we have been one of the countries that will bleach more than most countries. Between India and Jamaica, more bleaching go on in India and Jamaica. So, you know, Jamaica is really a paradox in itself, you know. All right, Reggie. So England go on? It get cool, it cool down the fire. How it go?
Well, the riot is over and the weather is more or less average.
You mean the riot subside?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Bridget, give thanks, man.
All right, man.
Yes. Yeah. Why is now move? Yes. Rashidi, you know, say we want to say give thanks for sitting in with us on this Marcus Garvey Earth Day, and what better way to celebrate it but to sit down and with a Bridget and talk about the African experience and the African times, you know?
Not just a way to celebrate Garvey's birthday, but to end my trip to Jamaica this time. It's been a wonderful experience. I've met so many people who are hungry for knowledge of self. I would like to think I had a big impact, and it's been an honor to be on your show. And again, I conclude with this statement that I repeat again and again, because this is what it's all about. What you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. What you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself, and what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. History is very, very important. Garvey would say that, and it's as relevant again as it was when Garvey was alive, 1914. Perhaps it's even more relevant today in 2011.
Yeah, man, give thanks. Give thanks, really. This is the cutting edge, and we want to thank RUNOKO RASHIDI. He has been here with us. By the way, how today went down to at the St. Anne thing?
It was nice.
Yes.
Lots of people there.
Last year I was there.
Very encouraging.
What you did last year, I was the person who was doing it last year.
I'm following in good footsteps there, my brother.
I was there last year, but yes, it's a good thing. It's not under the statue they kept it.
Yeah, it was still there.
Under the statue.
So, Muta, again, I want to thank you. We love you all over the world. We appreciate what you're doing, and we hope that your best work is yet to come. And I look forward to working with you again and again.
Yeah, man. At the last time I see it was in England.
Yeah, it was England, so we're going to have to meet somewhere else the next time, brother. And the first time was in Belize.
Yeah, Belize.
You may remember.
Yeah, I remember Belize. Trust me, man. Yeah, man.